Hey, shalom and welcome to Wisdom and Torah. I'm happy to be here with you again. Today has been a really, really good day trying to share and to with some people in Spanish some of the things that I've been studying lately. And, I decided to do a short live here programming, and I wanted to do it in English. So as we study the Torah portion for the week, there are some very important elements and there's some very important principles that I think for us as believers in Messiah, we should consider the research and the study. And as you know, I focus a lot of my teachings on temple research. Now, the last 12 years, I've been focusing a lot more on history, archaeology, anthropology, geography, and also a lot of the rabbinical writings in the context of the temple and the functions of the temple. And many people, when we look at scripture and we start following the Sabbath, and recently I did a teaching on Facebook, as a matter of fact, and you can go back to my wall and you can see it there, the connection between the Sabbath and the Tabernacle. Now today we're going to continue on that theme, but from the Torah portion's perspective. This week's Torah portion deals with how towards the end of the construction, when everything is leading towards the construction of the tabernacle, the presence of God is going to be the zenith, is going to be the high, the climax of all of the Exodus experience is going to be the tabernacle. The tabernacle is going to be the essence of the whole purpose of redemption from Egypt. The Mount Sinai and the tabernacle. Why? Because the tabernacle represents where God dwells with his people. Now, this is one of the things that as a believer and as a follower of the Torah, is very puzzling to me. So why would the Creator of heaven and earth want to dwell with us on the earth? To me, that's very puzzling. And at the same time, it's very humbling, and it's extremely, I'm in awe of him. Because considering who we are, how we behave, our fallen state, the Creator is looking for a people who are willing to stand on the gap for him so that we can become his people, so that we can become his example on the earth. Now think about that for a minute. He chose Israel for a purpose. He gave us a mission. Now this week's Torah portion is really amazing because when you read it, it starts with Exodus 35, verse 1 through Exodus 38, verse 20. But as I did the connections before with the other teaching that I did on the Sabbath and the tabernacle, and how, the temple and the tabernacle are interlinked, that's why we do this Shabbat table in the context of the altar. All the elements, a lot of the symbolism coming from the temple. In chapters 35, verse 1, I'm reading here from my Bible, it says, Then Moses gathered all the congregation of the children of Israel, gathered and said to them, These are the words that the Lord has commanded you to do. Work shall be done for 6 days. The seventh day shall be as holy for you. And on the Sabbath of rest to the Lord, whoever does any work shall be put to death. And you shall kindle no fire, throughout your habitations on the Sabbath day. Now, it starts with, again, it comes back to it. It starts with the Sabbath, and it goes right into the tabernacle. In Genesis, starts with the temple, and it finishes with the Sabbath. In the book of Revelation, it finishes with the millennial reign, which is the microcosm of the Sabbath. So we have so many patterns here that are very important. Now, as you keep reading, towards the end of the book of Exodus, the whole bottom line at the end of chapters 40 is when the glory of God comes down on the temple, that no one can minister in the tabernacle, because now the Lord, comes dwelling with its people in the midst of the camp. Up to this point, the Creator is trying to teach Moses so that Moses would teach the Aaron and his children and the kingdom of Israel how to behave as a holy people and how to maintain the camp holy, the tabernacle being the center of the holiness of the camp, as an example of their king being enthroned. So what is about to happen here is trying to define for us how in the ancient world kings were enthroned and kings will do three things. They will build palaces, temples, and a garden. Palace, temples, and a garden. In the ancient world, when kings were enthroned, they built palaces, temples, and to their gods, and also a garden. So we know, according to Scripture, that the temple, the Beit HaMikdash, was the place where the presence of God would dwell. But also, it was designed, in 1 Kings, tells us that it was designed as a garden. Now, when we study these principles, now let's make a connection with Genesis, okay? Let's make a connection because I believe that Exodus chapters 25 to Exodus chapters 40, 16 chapters speaking about the tabernacle. And Genesis 1 to 2 are like a bookends. Genesis 1 to 2 and Exodus 40 are bookends. Starts with creation, chaos. Goes to Exodus. Starts in the book of Exodus with chaos, exile, death, outside the covenant. Humanity is outside the covenant in the book of Genesis, chapters 3, when they sin. Okay, they go into chaos. The whole purpose of the Lord is to create and restore order for the kingdom. So Exodus becomes the time when the kingdom is restored. The order of the Creator is restored. When now Israel becomes Adam on the earth, humanity in the image of the invisible God. That's why the commandments, one of them is, you should not have any other gods before me. No image of anything. Why? Because the mandate of humanity is going to be restored to Israel as the image of God on the earth, so that through righteousness and justice, Israel can convey the existence of God on the earth as their king's priests. Okay? Because the original mandate of Adam was to represent him as the king on the earth. Okay? But as Adam moved away from the garden, moves away from the presence of God, moves away from the holiness of the Lord, now there has to be a redemption for all of humanity. But if all of humanity needs to be redeemed, and Israel is already in disobedience, how can the humanity come to full restoration and tikkun olam, restoration of all things, renewing of all things, if the kingdom chosen by God is not first restored? That's the essence of the covenant renewal. That the covenantal renewal is to restore Israel so that Israel can continue their mission as the image of God on the earth. That's why we have the Spirit of God sealed us. And as we are sealed with His Spirit, we are now supposed to be His witnesses, and we bear His image. That's why we're supposed to behave in righteousness and justice. Let me make some connections here with you. I'm going to read from this book. It's called The Temple by Joshua Bertman. A very good book. I highly recommend you get it and read it. It does a really good job. And I've read a few books on the text, on the context, but this one does a really good job. And let me give you some of the titles that he has here. What is Kedusha? What is holiness? In the introduction alone, he talks about the temple as a symbol. Then what is holiness? What is Kedusha? Chapters 2 talks about the temple as a Garden of Eden. Chapters 3, Sinai and the sanctuary. Chapters 4, political prominence, the prerequisite of Solomon's temple. Chapters 5, a multifaceted center and its problem. Chapter 6, making sense of sacrifices. It's a very, very good book that I highly recommend. Chapter 7, the lessons of rebuilding. And it gives you a good insight using ancient Near Eastern context and some very important research from ancient Near Eastern researchers. All right, so this is what we're going to do. From page 13, he's making a connection with Genesis and the Exodus, the Torah portions that we're reading right now. Now it says, on the Facebook Live that I just did recently, I make some connections between the Sabbath and the temple. Okay? Sabbath and the tabernacle, based on, Leviticus 19 verse 30 and Leviticus 26 verse 2. And we're building on that, okay? That's what we're doing here. It says, on the surface level, the link between the two, the temple and the Sabbath, is an explicit one, as the Torah calls for their safeguarding in a single command. You shall keep my Sabbath and revere my sanctuary. I am the Lord. So what we're going to do is, if the Lord is asking us to revere his temple and to keep the Sabbath, and he's making a direct link between the two, connecting them, then that's why the temple, the table on Shabbat becomes as an altar, and every head of the family on Shabbat becomes as a type of priest. Okay? So it says, in Genesis chapters 1, verse 31, says this, we're making connections. And God saw that all he had made, and behold, that it was good. When you read in Exodus chapters 39, verse 43, remember, these are typologies. Moses is a type of the Father in this case, right? As a new creation motif. This is what it's called, a new creation motif. Okay, new beginnings, new creation. And then in Exodus 39, verse 43 says, Moses saw all of the skilled work, and behold, they have done it. And Elohim had commanded, and that he had done it. Now in Genesis 2:1 says, the heavens and the earth, all the array, were completed. In Exodus 39:32 says, all the work of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting was completed. In Genesis chapters 2, verse 2 says, and God completed all the work that he had done. In Exodus 40, verse 33 says, and Moses completed the work. In Genesis chapters 2, verse 3 says, and God blessed. In Exodus chapters 39, verse 43 says, and Moses blessed. In Genesis chapters 2, verse 3 says, and sanctified it. You know, Kiddush. Kiddush is sanctifying the Sabbath. And the Lord sanctified it in Genesis. And in Exodus chapters 40, verse 9, and says, and you shall sanctify it in all its vessels. And then the presence of God fell on the tabernacle in chapters 40, and it tells us that the priests, which are a microcosm or a representation of Adam restored, humanity restored. That's why they were white. That's why they were in the space of holiness, in the sacred area of the tabernacle. These things are all connected. They are all connected to understanding the connection between the Sabbath and the temple, the tabernacle and the Sabbath. And why was it that the Lord instructed Israel to build the tabernacle in the middle of the camp? Because at that moment, the camp of Israel became the garden. Everything being holy. Now, one of the things that I'm learning that I think is important is that the whole premise of creation was not to keep only Israel, okay, or the garden, for Adam to only live there, but it was for humanity, in the sense of the perfect image of God, Adam, in the presence of the Lord in perfection, to expand from the garden to get all of humanity to submit to the authority of the great king, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. That's the whole intent. You know, so we're doing it backwards. We are coming from all the nations, returning as the trees of righteousness, returning to the land, okay, to the garden. So when Messiah returns and the temple is rebuilt, the palace is restored, and the garden is restored, then the nations, Israel's going to go back to the nations to subdue them and to bring them into the submission of the Creator under the authority of the Torah. That's exactly what Zechariah 14 says. Zechariah 14 says that all nations will go up to Jerusalem to keep the Feast of Tabernacles, which is basically is an enthronement ceremony. Okay, so all these things start to make more sense if we understand the principles that the Torah is trying to convey to you, which are foreign to us because the Bible is written for us, but not to us. I always keep saying that. I learned that from John Walton. He made that statement and really revolutionized my thinking. I'm thinking that is true. Although the Bible applies to me, yet it was not written to me directly. I am a beneficiary of the commandments that were given that have transcended all through all these generations, and the principles are still the same, although I'm in a different area. And some commandments apply to me here, some commands apply to in the land. But in this case, these principles, new creation motif, cosmology, ancient Near Eastern history, and contrast between cultures. Ladies and gentlemen, all of the things that we research are extremely important in order for us to have a greater understanding of the plan of the Creator and the gospel. What is the mystery of the gospel, really? What is the good news? Hey, The good news is this. It's quite simple now. The Creator wants to restore his house, which is the earth, the temple, which is the earth, the garden, which will be the earth. And he chose Israel to have the mission. How would you do it? To become a kingdom of righteousness and justice. To show the character and the honor, the integrity and the righteousness of God. Now, by understanding who Israel was, then the nations will be grafted into it, expanding the kingdom of God through the nations, to make the earth again a sacred place, a sacred domain like it once was. See, that's why in the book of Revelation, when the millennium ends, then God will dwell among us. That's what it says. But that's always been his plan. He wanted to dwell among us in Genesis. He wanted to dwell among us in the wilderness. He wanted to dwell among us in the temple. But because of our disobedience, the dispersion, exiled, judgment. But he has brought the good news. The good news is, I will redeem you. I will restore you. I will rededicate you. I will rebuild you. I will stand for you, and then I will bring you from among the nations, restore the kingdom, restore the temple, restore the garden, and then send Israel from Jerusalem, ki mitzion tete Torah, to gather the nations to submit and to recognize the authority, the kingship, and submit to the Creator. Not to a religion, but to the Creator. That is our mandate. Okay? So, what themes do we see in this week's Torah portion as you read it from Exodus 35, verse 1 to Exodus 38, verse 20? What I see is the dedication of the tabernacle begins with the command of the Sabbath. The dedication of the Sabbath every week begins with the Kiddush when you read Genesis chapters 1, verse 1 through 3. You are being used by the Creator to be the voice to consecrate the earth. Now think about this. Every hour on the hour, for 24 hours, once a week, the whole earth is being consecrated back to God. Let me tell you how that happens. Let's just say that right now in Florida, sundown, let's just for the sake of argument, sundown goes down to 6. Puerto Rico today is an hour ahead. Okay? So over there, sundown already happened. Okay? In Oklahoma, it's an hour less. And then in Arizona, it will be 2 hours later. You see what I mean? So every hour on the hour, everywhere all over the world, there's going to be someone saying the Kiddush. Right? And the Lord created the heavens and the earth, and the work was finished. So everyone for 24 hours is going to be consecrating the day that the Lord sanctified in creation. That means, ladies and gentlemen, that we become Adam in the high level of holiness on Shabbat, that the whole week points to that day. He raises our honor. He gives us a table that is connected with the tabernacle. And there now we proclaim His holiness, His authority, His kingship, the ownership of the earth. And He uses Israel, and now you from among the nations have been grafted into Israel to be a partaker of the honor, to help consecrate the earth. What a great miracle it is that many of us come from the nations, and now we are participating into the consecration of the earth once a week on Shabbat, and then during the high holidays. If you think about it from that perspective, we have a greater purpose than arguing about all kinds of crazy topics. Our purpose is to help the Creator become His witnesses, become His image on the earth, so that we will help and bear witness to the nations that He's the Creator, that He is holy, that He is the King, and that He dominates not only the earth, but all of creation. That is our mandate. So what are the motifs we're talking about here? 1, new creation. You will find this all through the Bible. New creation concepts, you can find it easily in the story of Noah when he comes out of the ark. New creation motif. When they come through the Red Sea, new creation motif. When they cross the River Jordan, new creation motif. When they mikvah before presenting themselves on Mount Sinai, new creation. When you took an immersion and you confess Messiah and you believe that God raised him from the dead, that's new creation. For what purpose? To be the witnesses and to help the Creator consecrate his earth back again. How? By eating correctly, by keeping the commandments, by celebrating the high holidays, by understanding his character and his righteousness. Number 2, connecting the book of Genesis to Exodus as bookends. It's all one book. The story of creation in reality doesn't end after the book of Exodus. But the book of Leviticus that's coming up in 2 weeks is going to reveal to you, after God establishes heaven on earth, the temple, heaven on earth, the garden, heaven on earth, his palace, heaven on earth, his enthroned kingdom, then the book of Leviticus is giving you instructions how to behave and how to come near the Creator as offerings to a king, tribute to a king, approaching a king, praying to a king. That's what the whole purpose is. That's why in the book of Exodus, it ends with the kavod, with the presence of God. But it doesn't tell you anything else. Now imagine if you only had the book of Exodus and you did not have the book of Leviticus. What would happen? You would not have an idea how to please this great Creator who just made himself known right in front of your eyes by the cloud, by the presence of him in the midst of Israel. You would not know how to please him. Now, this is a very important topic in question here because in the ancient Near East, they believed that the gods were temperament. You know, they had, how do you call it? Not temperament. It was capricious, or that you never knew how to please them. They could kill you like that. They could just get rid of you. Because so therefore, people lived a observance to their gods, but in fear. They believed that the gods only wanted them just to supply for their needs. They believed that their gods created them just to be a workforce and slaves. Israel, however, when they get to Mount Sinai, the first thing the Lord says is to Israel, it says, I'm going to make you a peculiar people, a royal kingdom, a kingdom of priests. Now, what is that in context of ancient Near Eastern history? In the ancient Near East, and by the way, ladies and gentlemen, please do not read the book of Exodus if you've never read Egyptology and studied it before. You're never going to fully understand the book of Exodus if we never consider studying the time frame when these things and these events happen. We're not doing ourselves a favor if we don't do that. In the ancient world, they believed that only kings, priests, and a prince can hear the voices of their gods. That's it. Only the elite, only the royal people had the right to hear the voices of their gods. And that makes sense in the context of the ancient Near East, when they believed that the gods were divine, and they believed that the kings were divine, and they believed that the priests were divine, and they believed that they were the intermediator between the gods. So therefore, only they can hear the voices of their gods. So when they get to Mount Sinai, can you imagine a mixed multitude? The Torah tells you that the people in the wilderness was made up of the Israelites, the house of Israel, and also the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude, people coming from the nations. Now imagine all those came from Egypt. So many of them must have been either slaves or oppressed, believing all their lives that only the kings and the priests can hear from their gods and no one else. So what does the Creator of Israel do? What does the God of creation do? He tells them in Exodus 19, verse 5 and 6, that if you obey my covenant and keep my commandments, I will make you Israel. But remember, there was a mixed multitude. Okay? You come from slavery, oppression, marginalized. You never knew your God until now. You see him with a mighty strong hand and strong power. And the first thing he tells you on his holy mountain, sacred space, he says, you're going to be a kingdom of priests. You're going to be a holy nation, a royal people. And then what does he do? Everyone hears the voice of the Creator. See, to us, we look at that verse and we assume that now everyone can be a high priest, when in fact the context of those verses is raising the level of honor to let Israel know that you are returning to Eden. I'm going to make you as Adam. I want you to have access to me. I want you to come directly to my sacred space. Your job, Adam, is to keep my sacred space holy, sanctify my Sabbath, keep my feast, eat kosher, eat clean, so that the nations will know that there is a God, that there is a God. So we have new creation motif. The book of Genesis and the book of Exodus is a bookends. The tabernacle, ladies and gentlemen, in reality what it is, Eden restored. That's really what it is. The tabernacle and the temple represent Eden restored. Okay? That's really what it is. So Moses, okay? Moses, I have some notes here. And I was studying something else and now I forgot the connection. But when you look into the Eden restored, you have the Lord on Mount Sinai, Adam in creation. Okay? And then you have Israel on Mount Sinai. They're supposed to be together. They're supposed to be humanity, Adam. Okay? Then you have Moses. You have Moses as the mediator or the architect in the tabernacle. And the Lord was the architect in creation. Then you have the garden. The tabernacle is the garden. In the temple in Genesis chapters 1 and 2 was the garden, with a sacred area where the presence of God was. And then you have Adam. Adam in creation. Israel is supposed to be the new Adam. That's why Yeshua is called the last Adam. Yeshua restored Israel to the same mandate to become Adam on the earth, to be the image of the invisible God. This is why Paul, Rav Shaul, keeps using the expression in regards to Yeshua. He is the image of the invisible God, the express image of his glory. In other words, he's trying to take you back to Genesis to let you know that humanity is going to be restored to its original mandate. But it takes Israel as a nation to take the mission and go get them. That's why we cannot make an exceptions between people. We cannot show partiality between races. That's why we have to take the message of the gospel, the good news, and let them know, hey, good news. You can return to the garden. Well, how do I do it? You have to have a confession, an oath. Second, you have to obey the rules of the kingdom. Third, you have to help and pray for the rebuilding of the house. Because when the house is rebuilt, the king is here. When the house is rebuilt, the throne is declared. When the house is here, the nations must declare their sovereignty of God on the earth. Next, the Shekinah, or the glory of the Lord, the kavod. In Genesis, you know that the Lord was walking in the cool of the day. Many of us believe that it was the Messiah walking in the cool of the day. That's all good and dandy. But the point is that the presence of God was walking in the cool of the day. Because why could that happen? Because the garden was perfect in holiness. Just like the high priest was perfect in holiness and can go into the Holy Holies once a year. You and I do not have any access to the Holy Holies. Only Yeshua in the heavenly tabernacle. But in the millennial reign, the temple will going to be restored. The garden will be restored. The priesthood will be restored. The sacred space will be restored. Now, Israel is not going to be able to go into the Holy Holies. But remember that after the millennial reign or the Messianic age, we're going to have Tikkun Olam. We're going to have restoration of Olam Hava. Okay, and then when the whole earth is restored again, it's restored. When the whole earth is restored, then what's going to happen is the earth is ready to receive the glory of God, just like the tabernacle was ready to receive the glory of God. And this is why in Genesis, he sanctifies the Sabbath after he prepares the earth to receive the holiness of his kingdom. That's why he prepared the tabernacle and then the glory came down. This is why he prepares the earth for 1,000 years before his glory comes down on the earth after the Messianic age. All these connections are connected. They are all one if we follow the motifs. Let's go to Exodus 40, verse 33. Exodus 40, verse 23. It shares something with that I think is important. It says, I'm sorry. Exodus 16, I apologize. Looking for the wrong thing here. Actually, let me jump here. I have the wrong verse. So, there we go. It's verse 38. In Exodus chapters 40, let me read from 34 so that we can follow sequence. It says, Then the cloud covered the tabernacle of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter the tabernacle of meeting because the cloud rested. Remember what the word rest represented in the ancient world? It was an idiom for kingship. Shabbat, to rest. Okay? To rest means to rule and reign. So now the glory of the Lord rested where? On the tabernacle. His throne on the earth. That's why the book of Ezekiel says that the temple was the place where he rests his feet. Okay? That's where he can put his feet, the footstool on the earth. That is the language of kingship. And here it says, and he rested above it, and the glory of the Lord filled the house, the temple, the tabernacle. When the cloud was taken up from above the tabernacle, the children of Israel went onward in all their journeys. But if the cloud was not taken up, then they did not journey until the day, and it was taken up. For the cloud of the Lord was above the tabernacle by day, and fire was over it by night in the sight of all the house of Israel through all their journeys. But the key here is when they finished the work, in verse 33, and he raised up the court all around the tabernacle and the altar, and hung up the screen of the court gate. So Moses finished the work. Just that God finished the work on creation, he rested. Moses finished the work of the tabernacle, which is the garden, which is all earth, right? And then he rests. He finished the work, and then the presence of God came. In Genesis, he finished the work, and the presence of God came to rule and reign over his creation. That's what this Torah portion is trying to teach us. There's a lot here that we need to learn. But guess what? If we do not study the tabernacle and the temple, we are going to miss these very important points. If you say that the temple is no longer relevant, then we are minimizing the restoration of the garden on the earth, the rule and the kingship, literally when it will come on the earth again. Because in the ancient world, when a king was enthroned, he built a temple to his God, he'll build a palace and a garden. In this case, the temple is God's palace. The temple happens to be the garden. We have a lot to learn. And instead of what I would like for you to consider, instead of studying the Bible to minimize scripture, or to take away things that he has clearly said are eternal and forever and holy, kadosh, why don't we take the time to research these maybe a little bit more deeper, because we can make a very bad mistake by minimizing, eliminating, and marginalizing areas of the Bible that are extremely important for us to learn. So, in Zechariah 14, it explains to us. I have many people argue with me all the time. They don't want a dialogue. They want to argue. And, with all due respect to the audience, how, I always respect the audience. And, even if you disagree with me, it's okay. You don't have to just look it up, verify it. But it's sad because there are many people who argue about the temple. And by the questions they ask and the arguments they proposed, they don't study the temple. And what I would recommend is consider the research first before we can make a statement that could be detrimental to the authority of God and his temple. That's all I'm asking. We have more resources today than ever before. So let me make another connection. I'll leave you with this. In chapters, I think it's chapters 3 of the same book here, he's making a connection between the sanctuary and Mount Sinai. Okay, in the same book. In page 41, it says, finally, it is worth noting the parallelism that highlights the role of the tabernacle as a site for covenantal convocation. A string of correlations exists between the finale of the Sinai revelation as portrayed in Exodus 24 and the closing stages of the tabernacle's construction and consecration. So they're connecting Mount Sinai and the consecration of Israel, Mount Sinai, with the tabernacle. So we're going to make those connections now, okay? Exodus 24, verse 15 to verse 18. Those are the verses we're going to connect with the tabernacle being erected, being built, okay? It says, Moses went up to the mountain, and the cloud covered the mount. When you read the tabernacle, it says the cloud covered the tent of meeting. In Exodus 24, 15 to 18 says, the presence of God dwelled on Mount Sinai. At the end of the building of the tabernacle says, the presence of God filled the tabernacle in Exodus 30, verse 34. In Exodus 24, in the Mount Sinai experience says, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. In Exodus 40, verse 35 says, Moses could not come to the tent of meeting, for the cloud dwelled on it. And by the way, it took 7 days to dedicate the tabernacle, and that's a very important thing for you and I to understand. In the ancient world, enthronement ceremonies took place in 7 days. The majority of the time took place in 7 days. And then lastly, he called to Moses on the 7th day from amid the cloud. In Leviticus 1:1 says, and he called Moses, and God spoke to him from the tent of meeting. It's interesting that you have Exodus. It ends with the cloud. It happened on the 7th day, that cloud. And then what happens? He calls Moses. There are too many parallels for us to ignore. There are too many things about the temple, about creation, about new creation motifs in the Bible, ancient Near Eastern history, temple function and temple priesthood, and how it works in correlation with the garden. We don't have the time to be minimizing the temple of my King. My King is faithful. My King is truth. My King is righteous. And he sent his son Yeshua in order that we will be restored, so that we can become again Adam on the earth. Are we living according to that mandate? Are we doing what is right in the eyes of the Lord? We are taking the mandate of righteousness and justice and revealing the house to the house of Israel, so that the house of Israel will be ashamed of their iniquities and come back and want to learn everything about the house, because the temple is the garden. The temple is the throne of God. The temple is where the presence of God dwells. You cannot say you are a temple if you don't know what the temple is. Many people say, oh, I'm a temple of the Lord. Well, if you're eating pork, you're not being a temple. Because in the temple, nothing unclean can be put on the altar. If you are a temple and you say you call yourself the temple of God, and yet you're not keeping Sabbath, then you're not sanctifying that temple like God sanctified his temple. So therefore now we connect the physical with our lives as a kingdom. We're supposed to become a living tabernacle. But how can you understand how a living tabernacle functions if we don't know how the structure functions? If the tabernacle was where the presence of God dwelled, but the tabernacle had to be pure, nothing unclean and nothing morally corrupt can be dwelling in that tabernacle, how can we think that the presence of God dwell in this temple, and then we are morally corrupted and we are not pure, ritually cleansed, morally cleansed in this case? There are too many connections. And the reason why the church system is in disarray and is also in chaos, and the reason why many people within the Hebrew roots movement is in chaos and in all kinds of arguments, we don't go back to our mandate to become Adam on the earth and to learn these principles that are so important. Amen? So I highly recommend you consider getting this book. Dina Dye also does a great job in her books. Joseph Good also mentions it in Measure the Pattern. And I also want to recommend something to you. They are in, I think I had the book here earlier. I don't know where I put it. But in every Torah portion, there are commandments. What I would recommend for my audience is to consider the study of the commandments in the Torah portion. Because when you focus on some of the commandments in the Torah portion, specifically coming up in the book of Exodus, in the next Parashat, and then also in the book of Leviticus, Vayakel, you'll be hard-pressed to really understand your life as a temple if you do not study the sacrificial system and the purity laws. So this is something I recommend you consider studying, the tabernacle and also the temple. And I will forever continue to encourage you to study the temple and the tabernacle, ladies and gentlemen. We cannot understand the throne of God, the will of the Creator, the righteousness of the Creator, if we do not understand His house, His throne, His kingdom. Shalom. May you be blessed. Thank you for the time you've given me today. And I pray that this short teaching will be a blessing to you and all the brothers and sisters all over the world. Lehitraot, toda rabah, Shavua tov.